My name's Kevin Aguanno, and I'll be your presenter for today. This topic is on lean project management. This is the first of a two-part series. We actually run these webinars roughly every 2 weeks throughout the year, and this is a two-part series. It'll be running now and continuing on 2 weeks from now. Let me give you a little bit about my background. As I said, my name's Kevin Aguanno. I've got over 30 years of experience in project management. I have numerous agile and project management related certifications, all the key ones and some you probably haven't heard of. I've written over 30 books on project management and lean or agile related topics. I'm an executive consultant. I've been teaching some of these topics since the 90s, and I'm sure you'll find a lot of interesting information here. Lean, this lean concept, forms the foundation of what we now call obviously lean enterprise, lean transformations, but also agile. Agile management, agile work comes from this lean background. So it's really important to understand some of these lean underpinnings and how they can impact how we work today. Let me give you a little bit more information. So the agenda we're going to be covering today in this lunchtime webinar, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history on this lean thinking, where it comes from, what led to it, and what we can take from this. And then specifically, I'm going to talk to you about the 8 types of waste that lean identifies, a little bit about each type and how it causes waste in our projects, our initiatives. I'm going to talk about the 5 elements of lean, the elements that we look at. There's 4 rules, and there's 1 technique to identify and eliminate waste. So I'm going to 8, 5, 4, and 1 is the rule for today. And we're going to go through that process as we proceed. So let's give you a little bit of a history on where lean comes from. Lean got its start in the late 1920s. Late 1920s, a university professor named Shewhart came up with, Walter Shewhart came up with this concept of continuous improvement. And he created something called the PDCA wheel: plan, do, check, and act. You may have heard this as the Deming cycle. Something came out, one of his PhD students, Edward Deming, popularized this, but he didn't actually develop it. Shewhart did, his university professor. And how this works is, he says, for any process to get better at it, to improve it, to make it more efficient, more cost effective, more higher quality, etc., we need to go through a 4-stage process. Shewhart said, first you have to plan out the process, define the process, figure out all the steps in the process, make sure it's all crystal clear, well documented, well understood by everybody. Once you've got that process planned out, do it, execute the process, follow the plan, do the process. Now, many people just stop there. You plan your work, plan to work, and then execute the plan, and they're done. And my project's over. But you're missing out on this concept of continuous improvement. Continuous improvement happens with the next 2 steps. The next step is, once you're done, you're executing your process, executing your plan, check to see how you did. In other words, do a lessons learned or a retrospective type activity where you look back at your performance and ask, was it okay? Could it have been improved at all? Are there any mistakes that I made that I can avoid in the future? You check to see how you did and gather some data, some metrics on possible areas for improvement. Now, many organizations stop there. They've done my lessons learned, I've documented them, I threw them in some database, and I can forget about them, and I move on to my next project. And Shewhart says, if you stop there, you're not doing continuous improvement. You're gathering some data, but you're relying on people to magically remember relevant facts from past projects to see if they can apply them again. But that's a very weak process. Shewhart says to get true continuous improvement, you have to do the last step, which is act. Act on those lessons learned. Take those lessons learned and apply them right away to change your process, to change your plan, so that next time you've got a better plan that you can then execute, check again, find if there's any new lessons learned, change your plan. And the idea is that over time, as you cycle through this wheel over and over and over again, things get faster and cheaper and higher quality and more consistent, fewer surprises, more reliable, you can improve your performance. That's the idea behind this, was Shewhart's plan, do, check, act wheel. Okay, great. Now, why do I care? Well, let me talk to you about a sad time in history. At the end of World War II, the US had basically destroyed Japan. There was not much left. They had bombed roads and bridges and schools and factories and water treatment plants, and it was just a mess. The country was a mess. They had destroyed much of the infrastructure in the major cities. So at the end of the war, as part of the recovery from the war, there was a post-war reconstruction effort to rebuild Japan, rebuild the infrastructure and restart the economy. And that was a major effort of the West at the end of the war. Now, some of the stuff they found in Japan at the end of the war was quite advanced. Japan had really advanced knitting technology. They had automated knitting machines that produced fabulous fabrics and silks and things that the West didn't have an equivalent for yet. So they were advanced in some areas, but other areas they were quite behind where the West saw themselves as being in a more modern approach to things. One example is leading people, managing people. In the production factories before and during the war, many Japanese production foremen carried canes and would actually beat the employees who were underperforming to get higher levels of performance. It worked, they got higher performance, but morale wasn't very good as a result. So the West, when they were reconstructing Japan, decided to teach the Japanese Western views of management that would give them more Western focused, we may even call them enlightened views of people management. And this changed the Japanese management culture significantly. Two of Shewhart's PhD students were sent over to teach the Japanese some of these techniques. One of them was Edward Deming. I mentioned him earlier. Another postgrad student of Shewhart's was another fellow named Joe Jurin. They're often known as the fathers of the modern quality movement these days. They were sent over to Japan and taught the Japanese some of the latest management concepts and included a lot of Shewhart's content around continuous improvement. Now, the Japanese absolutely understood these concepts. They got it. They were smart. They understood immediately. And in fact, the cyclical nature of Shewhart's continuous improvement kind of aligned with some traditional Japanese views from their traditional religions of the cyclical view of nature and things like that. They took this on and adopted it quickly. Not only did they take it on and adopt it, they created entire processes, companies, even industries around this concept of continuous improvement. And it dramatically changed Japan, dramatically changed the country. Now, for a few years, they were kind of held back by the West. We wanted to kind of punish them for, for what was done during the war, I guess, right? But a bit of a colonial attitude. We wanted to hold them back and use Japan as a cheap manufacturing economy, produce a lot of cheap goods, inexpensive, mass-produced goods for the West. Kind of like how we're using China today as a manufacturing economy because it's inexpensive to produce stuff for us. Now, what's interesting was after the US got pulled away or distracted from holding back Japan, there was the wars in Southeast Asia starting in the mid-late 60s. We were in the midst of the Cold War. That kind of distracted the West as well. We had other things going on that pulled the US and the West in general away from focusing too much on Japan, and they got turned into other areas. When that happened, quickly, Japan rose up. Without the boot of the West on its neck, it was able to stand up proudly and excel forward, given all the capabilities that they had from learning these new management techniques and this concept of continuous improvement. Interesting what happened. In a few short years, dramatic transformation of Japan. Let me give you a couple examples. From a period of about the mid-70s to the mid-80s, huge changes in the Japanese economy, in the world economy, as a result of Japan. So let's look at the mid-70s. Let's look at the photocopier industry. In the mid-70s, the global leaders for manufacturing photocopiers were Xerox, who had about 2/3 of the global market, Kodak, and IBM, the three leaders of manufacturing photocopies in the mid-70s. By the mid-80s, they were pretty much out of the business. The market had been taken over by Japanese. Little company called Fujitsu in 1984 had taken over already almost a quarter of the global photocopier market. And other Japanese manufacturers piled on board as well. Toshiba, Sanyo, etc., Canon, other Japanese companies jumped on board and basically wiped out the Western photocopier manufacturers out of that industry, right? IBM doesn't make photocopiers, hasn't made photocopiers in a long time. They got out of that completely. Kodak doesn't make anything anymore. They're a patent holding company. So they're not even manufacturing photocopiers anymore. Xerox doesn't make photocopiers anymore. In fact, to photocopy something at one time was to Xerox it. It was that dominant. Their brand became a verb in the popular parlance. But Xerox doesn't make photocopiers anymore, right? They're basically a document management software company now. Who took over? The Japanese completely took over that industry. Same thing happened in consumer electronics. Right? Major US companies and European companies were dominating the consumer electronics market in the 70s. Zenith, RCA, other companies, Philips, which is a Dutch company, were dominating the electronics market. General Electric was big into consumer electronics. However, in a few short years, from the mid-70s to the mid-80s, all of those companies got out of that market. In fact, got out or were wiped out of that market, to the point that even Philips today sells consumer electronics, but they're manufactured in Japan, which is with a Philips brand, and shipped to Japan or China and flipped to Philips. So they don't actually manufacture the stuff in Europe anymore. They're consumer electronics components. Why? Because the Japanese dominated that market. They took it over quickly. Companies like Mitsui and Sony. I mean, Sony dominated in the early 80s. I mean, they invented the Walkman, the Discman. I mean, they were co-inventors of the CD-ROM itself. Like, their innovation was incredible, so much so that they transformed an entire industry. And now consumer electronics is largely just owned by the Japanese, and now the Koreans have taken over. The Japanese cousins, the Koreans, took over huge parts of that market as well. And China is a rapid rising star in that area. So the East took it over and kicked out the West. Very interesting innovations that have happened in this industry. Same thing happened in cars. I don't know if you remember, back in the early mid-70s, the early Japanese cars were out in North America, and they weren't that good. The early Japanese cars, some of them looked pretty, but they weren't very reliable. They didn't stand up to our winters. They rusted through quickly. There were a lot of quality issues. They were poor quality cars as we would judge them today. However, quickly, 10 years forward, let's fast forward to the mid-80s, Honda and Toyota are winning awards for quality and design and innovation, to the point that the West was shocked and trying to figure out, oh my gosh, who are these guys? What are they doing? How can we possibly compete with this? A new technology came out in cars. I can't remember what it is right now. Maybe it was intermittent wipers or anti-lock brakes or something like that had come out. I can't remember which one it was. But Toyota had a car, from the time the technology became available to the time they had it in a car in the showroom. The car was already for sale with this technology, and it was 2 years. The major car companies like GM couldn't figure out how that's possible. It took them at least 5 to get that technology into the cars, because their processes were so slow and bureaucratic and cumbersome. They just couldn't turn it around that quick. And they couldn't imagine how Toyota could turn this around so quickly, get this new technology out into cars and get it approved, the regulatory approvals and everything else, and get it out there so fast. They just couldn't imagine. And the answer was this lean thinking, these lean approaches that come from this continuous improvement. Lean thinking comes as a natural evolution of this continuous improvement mentality that started with Shewhart. Lean thinking is a systematic approach to finding and eliminating anything that's wasteful or not adding value to the process through continuous improvement. The idea is find waste and get rid of it, or anything that isn't adding value but can be removed, do so. Optimize, get efficient, get focused. That's lean thinking. And anything is up for grabs. Lean calls out something called muda. Muda is the Japanese word for waste. And waste in Japanese mindset and lean thinking, waste is evil. We want to get rid of all sources of waste. And there's actually, lean identifies 8 types of waste, 8 sources of waste. The first is defects. Defects. So anything that's created improperly is a waste. You wasted your time building it, you wasted resources on it, and now you're going to waste time and resources finding the defect, fixing the defect, or repairing the defect. Defects are wasteful. So we're going to try and build perfection into our process so that there's no defects in the first place. Right? So it's all about perfection. There's actually a joke that's been around for years, and it's kind of interesting. So the story goes something like this, and I'm paraphrasing the joke because I don't remember it word for word, but the joke goes like this. A US company needed some microchips manufactured in Japan, and they had an order of 10,000 microchips that were going to be custom manufactured. So they placed the order with Japan, but they said they wanted no more than 100 defects per 10,000. They wanted that level of quality. A little while later, the Japanese shipped them the custom manufactured microchips. The US company opens the crate, and there's all the microchips and then another little box with a letter attached to it. And they pick up the box, they open up the letter, and the letter says, "Dear customer, here's your 10,000 chips that you requested. You asked for no more than 100 with defects in them. However, you didn't specify which defects you wanted. So here enclosed is the 100 defective chips. We just assigned random defects to them. I hope this meets your needs. Good luck." And the joke, that's the joke. The idea is that the Japanese processes around eliminating waste were so good at eliminating defects, they produced basically no defects by accident. All the defects that were there had to be deliberately created to meet the American order. I guess there was some misunderstanding in translation about their need for these 100 defects. So the idea is that the Japanese processes are so focused on perfection. Every time we go through that plan, do, check, act cycle, the check version is saying, okay, what defects did we find? How could we improve our processes so this defect doesn't happen again? And then we act to change the process to remove the source of that defect. The next time we go through the cycle, if we find any new defects, we do a root cause analysis and then fix the source of the problem so it doesn't happen again. And if you go through the cycle enough times, you pretty much stop producing defective products. Or if you do produce a defect, it's exceedingly rare. Exceedingly rare. You might be familiar with some of this thinking through something called Six Sigma, which is this concept of trying to get exceptionally high levels of quality by eliminating the sources of defects, by eliminating muda, by eliminating waste, right, in the process. So this is one source of waste, is these defects. Another is obsolete inventory. The idea is that if you buy too much raw material, too much inventory of components, and say you're going through and you're manufacturing stuff, and then partway through your manufacturing run, the standard changes. So the next shipment will have the new stuff, the new components. What do you do with the old ones? That's just waste, right? So the Japanese got rid of this obsolete inventory by doing something called just-in-time. Just-in-time manufacturing, just-in-time shipping, just-in-time supply chain. The idea, this comes from Japan in the 70s, it started. So we're just seeing some of this now in our North American supply chain, but it's been going on for 40, 50 years in Japan. The idea is that we will make things just in time so there's no waste from obsolete material. That even happens inside the factory. As we're manufacturing things, don't build up a bunch of partially built components waiting for the downstream steps in the production process to use them. If you build up too much of an inventory of this work in progress, that could cause waste as well if the standards change. That's an inventory of work in progress. That could cause waste because now the standard changes, all that stuff is waste. It's thrown out. So try to do just-in-time manufacturing. Don't build up inventories. Keep a very lean, minimal inventory, just enough so you can keep things moving, but don't pile up too much as a contingency or a risk management. We're going to replace that with just-in-time sourcing, and that should eliminate waste. The third type of muda or waste is extra steps in production that aren't needed. Look at your production process. Sometimes processes can be combined, steps can be combined. You might be able to buy materials that are some components that are pre-assembled, so you don't have to assemble them on the production line. Look for production steps that can be eliminated. That's another step of waste reduction that we can do. Okay. Another one is looking at how we move materials around a facility. Sometimes they bring in a skid of materials, put it in the warehouse, and now you need it in your production process. Okay, we need more of that. Let's go get it. And it's way in another building. So walking all the way over there to grab that stuff and bring it back, well, that's waste. That's people movement. That's waste number 5. People walking to get stuff and bringing it back. Maybe we should store it closer there. Maybe we should have the materials right beside the workstation of the person who needs it, so they're not stopping to go get it all the time. That walking around is a source of a lot of waste. So the Japanese design their production processes so that the workers are right next to the inventory, the components, the raw materials that they need to avoid people movement waste. But they also look at materials movement waste. Why put something in a warehouse to then go pick it out and move it somewhere else and then go pick it and move it around? Let's try and find more efficient ways of moving raw materials around to remove excess waste. They like their production process to be as close and efficient and smooth as possible. Not steps 1 and 2 are here, and then step 3 and 4 are at our factory on the other side of town. That's wasteful. Put them closer together, like put them in the same building. You're going to eliminate more cost and waste as well. Even when we store things in the warehouse, sometimes when you need it, it's buried behind 4 or 5 other skids because other stuff has come in. So now you got to start moving materials around to get at the skid of materials you need. That's, again, material movement waste. So lean thinking tries to think about the staging of materials in the warehouse and where they should be stored to try and eliminate excess movement there as well. Another is waiting. Waiting is the 6th type of waste, waiting. So sometimes you're waiting for an approval, you're waiting for something to dry, you're waiting for some kind of step to be completed before it can continue on. Look for some of these waiting elements that can be either eliminated or handled through in parallel processing. So maybe while we're waiting for something to dry, we can do something else on it that's not going to impact its ability to dry. Or in some cases, if we're waiting for an approval, maybe we can combine approvals into one. Maybe there's a pre-approval that can be granted for certain things to eliminate that extra step. The idea is to look for delays that we can get rid of in our processes that will improve the efficiency and throughput of our processes. That's one of the big steps that cause the introduction of these new car technologies in Toyota to dramatically exceed what was possible in GM. GM's process had lots of delays where there were committees that had to meet and had to approve things, and these committees got together once a month on the 3rd Thursday. So if you were ready at the beginning of the month, you had to wait till the 3rd Thursday to get it approved. That's a built-in 3-week delay, right? Whereas if the Japanese were trying to find ways of approving things as needed, just in time, that improve their throughput significantly. The 7th type of waste is when you build something that doesn't meet the needs of the client. And this is a really problematic situation because sometimes we guess at what the client needs, or even worse, we misunderstand. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, well, that's what I said, but not what I meant, right? This is a source of waste. You're creating products or services that have features nobody needs or nobody wants or doesn't meet the needs that they have. So the Japanese were really big on getting lots of feedback, focus groups, work with stakeholders, work with clients, work with the people who will be using your product and get their input into the design process right away. Have them on a committee or a team helping you understand that whether your process is going to be delivering what they need. Is this the product they're looking for, right? So having the end user involvement in product design, in product reviews, even having individuals whose job it is to represent those external clients internally. So have a champion, an end user champion who can come around and represent their needs and give feedback to the teams live is a great way of making sure you eliminate products that don't meet client needs, or you build in features or extra components that aren't used by the client, that aren't necessary. Next, the last one, the 8th type of waste, the 8th type of muda, is not taking advantage of the time that you have and the skills in your workforce. There are people that have amazing abilities on your team, but you slot them into such a narrow role that they never get to exercise those capabilities, right? I remember one person, I used to work in IT for IBM, and we had a person who was an amazing IT infrastructure architect. His abilities were significant. He could do amazing things with his capabilities and his skills and his training. Unfortunately, he was slotted into a job role where all he was doing was configuring Cisco routers all day. They kept assigning him that work over and over. He was really good at it, but it wasn't taking advantage of all of his talents. And honestly, he could be used more productively in other roles. We would have gotten more value out of that resource with those other job assignments. So not using those talents is another source of waste, or not using the time that's available, right? You may ask a client for, or a client may ask you to do something, and you may have 3 weeks worth of work. You do it in 2.5, and you hand it to them. You had an extra half a week. That's, you're efficient, but you were wasting that available time. That time could have been used perhaps to more efficiently schedule other jobs, right, that were delayed. Maybe we could have started another job sooner, and this one could have been delayed an extra 3 or 4 days, and the client wouldn't have cared because it still would have met their deadline, but now I would have gotten an early start on something else. So taking advantage at the enterprise level, not just at this initiative level, but looking more broadly, maybe that extra time could be used on other initiatives by delaying this one slightly to help another initiative complete or get its work done. So looking at enterprise level scheduling to take advantage of time that's available is another, advantage. So not using it would be a source of muda. So there's the 8 types of waste, right? Defects are wasteful. We can get rid of them. Obsolete inventory, either in raw materials or in process components, right, that are half done. That could be very wasteful if something changes. Extra steps in production that we didn't need. Moving materials around unnecessarily causes delays and costs. Moving people around unnecessarily, walking to other workstations to get components or to hand things off that would be helpful if they were closer together. Waiting, delays that could be eliminated. Building things that the clients don't need, or building things that they won't use because it's not what they wanted. And lastly, not taking advantage of the time and the talents that are available within your workforce. Again, those are 8 types of waste. Another problem with inefficiency is something called overburden, overwork, overburden. The Japanese call this Muri. This isn't normally just raw waste, but it's a challenge, right? It's caused by poor or inappropriate standards, right? If we have poor standards that aren't clear, we can end up with situations where people are overworked, facilities are overly burdened, equipment is running too fast and too hot and breaks down more quickly. So we're looking for strain, sources of strain. The idea with lean is to be more efficient, but that doesn't mean work harder. It means work smarter. I know it's a cliche, but it's really about thinking it through strategically. We should be able to work in a lean environment at a fixed production capacity that's a fairly high level capacity indefinitely without getting burned out. It should be achievable, it should be comfortable, but still able to be highly productive by removing sources of strain. If people are strained by bad management, if people are strained by bad HR policies, if people are strained by bad shift scheduling, if people are strained by unrealistic expectations, anything that causes strain can make people underperform, right? If they're overburdened. And that is another problem with the efficiency, right, that we can fix in a lean environment. The same thing with facilities that aren't maintained properly, facilities that are not heated or cooled properly, anything on facilities that can cause strain on the facilities themselves. Not enough electricity, we're getting brownouts, not enough water pressure, anything like that can cause this overburden that's happening, can cause ineffective production as well. And lastly, the equipment itself. As I said, if you run it too fast, too hot, you're not taking it down for regular maintenance cycles, you're keeping it up and running too often, you're going to get more breakdowns and more failures. So this lean thinking requires regular maintenance, regularly scheduled maintenance to avoid problems, to stretch the mean time between failures, right? We want to make this system and equipment and everything work as efficiently as possible by eliminating Muri, by eliminating this overburden. Okay, so we've talked about waste. Let's talk about lean. There are 5 components, 5 elements of lean. The first one is lean means we need to focus on delivering business value. We want to prioritize based on value. We want to make sure that every step, every single thing is contributing to value in the production process, in the product that we create. Everything is focused on value. We want value for money. We want to make the business earn the value that it's looking for, achieve the business case benefits. It's a very much almost like a shareholder focused mentality. We want value creation more than anything. It's not just about doing steps to make work, keep people busy. It's about creating business value. The second element of lean supports that. It's called value stream mapping. Value stream mapping is trying to figure out all the steps that we do in our production process to create this valuable product. What are the production steps that we go through, and how can we align those? How can we align those with the value they're creating? Are there steps that are causing more trouble and not creating enough value to justify their trouble? Maybe that's an opportunity for process improvement. Now, we can do this in projects, right? Because projects create deliverables. Projects create value. The whole point of a project is to achieve some business case benefits. So if we're focusing on maximizing the benefits to the sponsor, to the project sponsor, then we're going to be looking at what can we do in the value stream of the production process, or the plan, or the strategy that we put together for delivering this project. In our methodology, does every single step add to that value? That's the value stream mapping. We list all the process steps. We might even time those steps to see, are there steps that are taking too long? In lean, we call that process throughput takt time, right? Measuring timing, how long it takes to do steps in the process, and adding them up to see what's the minimum throughput time, and is there an opportunity to improve this through process improvement? That's all tied to value stream mapping, right? Are there unnecessary steps? Are there too many delays? Are there too many? Is it taking too long to get this approval? Is there a better way? Step 3 is about making that improvement to the takt time, improving the throughput, improving our performance. It's called improving flow. So maybe it's important to, in some cases, to do single tasks through the process, or single deliverables through the process. versus batches through the process. That's called using single flow versus batch flow, right? Sometimes if there's a batch of things we're doing, say there's a bunch of components that we need to modify as part of, I'll give you an example. Say we're doing an IT project, and one of my tasks is to fix defects, and maybe we have 200 defects. Instead of doing them as a batch, let's identify all the defects, let's analyze all the defects, let's fix all the defects, then let's verify all the defects. That may take a long time. That may take a month to get all those 200 defects resolved by the time they're all tested and verified before we hand it over to the next step. Maybe we work on them in smaller batches and just do the high priority defects or the GUI defects, then the middleware defects, then the hardware defects. Maybe we can prioritize them in some way into smaller batches and get some of them out the door quicker, improving the flow, getting some value delivered sooner rather than waiting for it to all come in one batch. Or in an extreme case, lean organizations pop them off one at a time. Let's pick a defect and get it analyzed, built, fixed, tested, and out the door. Next one, find it, fix it, get it out the door. That's what Google does. Google does over 50,000 code deployments every week. And that's mostly defect fixes. I found a defect, I'm going to analyze it, fix it, verify that it's fixed. Now I'm going to deploy that piece of code. Find the next defect, analyze it, fix it, and deploy that code. They do so many code deployments because they've automated much of the process. They've taken lean thinking to its ultimate extreme ends by trying to improve the efficiency of their process exceptionally, right? There's other companies that do this as well, learning from some of these concepts. But the idea is take one thing and get it done fast so that value can get out the door. Now, we pick those things in order of business value, in order of priority based on value, and we pop them out as quick as we can. So this may mean automated deployment processes or agile DevOps, as they call it. So we can automate the builds and the testing and deployment. That can all be automated so it can happen thousands of times a day. That would be improving the flow for individual single deployments or fixes. That would be single item throughput or flow. Another one, number 4 element of lean, is using a pull approach versus a push approach. So if I wanted you to say change the style or template that we're using on all of our key documents that we're using in this particular part of the business, say I gave you a new template and I said, okay, here's the new template. I want you to fix all the documents, and you take 200 documents and you cut and paste them into the new template, and then you start creating indexes for each one, and then you have to do a table of contents for each one, and you're going through all the steps of updating all these documents. Then you'll do a final QA, and then you'll release them. That's going to be one big batch. But what happens if I gave you these large number of documents, and partway through I said, oh, we changed our logo. Here's the new logo. It needs to go on every document. You may have to go back and restart. The documents that were partly through the process are wasted. It could cause a huge delay and restructuring. That's using a push approach. A pull approach is we pull one thing at a time through the production process to make sure that there's never any work in progress to eliminate waste. So for example, or to minimize work in progress. So each step in the process, maybe there's an individual doing each step, they request when they're ready. So I don't cut and paste 20 documents in their template and throw them to the next person, because now they've got a batch of 20 sitting in front of them and they got to quickly index each one. It's going to take a while. So I do one and provide it to the next person. And I don't make the next one till they say they're ready for the next one, to avoid a pileup of semi-completed work in front of them. When they say, I've indexed this one, I'm ready for the next one, I do the next one and hand it to them. The person downstream who's doing the table of contents, once the documents are indexed, they don't end up with anything piled in front of them because they pull another one off the first person. So ultimately, once the process gets started, you push the first one through, but ultimately, once everybody's got something to do, everybody's pulling from the person ahead of them, which drives the pace of the process. So the whole process only goes as fast as the slowest step. The slowest step determines the pace. You don't want somebody upstream working twice the speed, because you'll get a pileup of semi-completed work that if there's ever a change, that's all waste, right? So the idea is that the slowest person in the process determines the pace of the whole chain of value delivery, and that's using a pull approach. So if there is a change, there's one item at each step of the process that's potentially affected, not piles of semi-completed work that there's waste with. There's just the ones that are actively being worked on that need to be potentially updated to reflect the new change. So that's the pull approach. The pull approach tends to create a bit of a faster pace, believe it or not, because we've optimized now. We optimize the process through value stream mapping and improving flow. We optimize the process to eliminate steps that aren't needed, and we make it very efficient, that those things pull right through very quickly at a continuous pace. And in fact, some studies show that the pull approach, aside from waste, actually creates even more efficiency in the overall, because we don't end up not only with semi-complete materials that need to be wasted, as I said, but the process itself, people don't get overwhelmed with these huge piles of things piling up. There's not problems with dealing with stacks of materials and things getting damaged because there's too many in the, to store or in the way. They find there's tremendous savings at every step in the process by using a pull approach instead of a push approach. Batching, I'm not saying batching is bad. There are situations where batching is a good thing to do. It makes sense. But when you're looking at a production chain, a process of doing steps to get something ready, sometimes this pull approach is far more efficient. So an element of lean is looking at that and seeing if that's the case in this situation and taking advantage of it. The other element of lean is this quest for perfection. Remember, this all comes from continuous improvement from Shewhart. It's all about trying to achieve perfection. You want to optimize, you want efficiency, you want perfection. You want to make sure that your process is as lean and thin and optimized as possible. No waste, no overburden, no delays. You want the process to be as smooth as possible. No defects. You want everything to be so consistent that it's perfected all the way through. This may be familiar to you because there's other things that we know in the West that started by looking at lean. Another example is ISO 9000, which is a quality management framework developed by the International Standards Organization. It was largely a European effort to describe Japanese manufacturing quality standards, Japanese manufacturing quality production processes, and that's what led to ISO 9000. Lean comes from the same place. It's the same general concepts. Perfect your optimize and perfect your production so it's extremely consistent so that there's no variances, right? Lean just takes it one step further than ISO 9000. ISO 9000 only looks for standardization, right? Lean goes a bit further and looks for optimization and perfection as well. Excellent. So those are the 5 elements of lean. Here are the 4 rules of lean. So standardize where you can, right? Standardization means less mistakes, less thinking, less confusion if things are different. Standardize as much as you can. Limit the movement of materials, which we talked about. Limit the movement of people, again, those are all causes of waste. And lastly, train the heck out of everybody so everybody understands the full process, not just their step, but the whole process, because they may have ideas for improvement. They may suggest changes to the person upstream from them, how to improve their job performance so it'll impact the person downstream from the deliverables that they are catching and working with, how those deliverables, that process could be done differently to improve things downstream. So make sure everybody's educated in the full process, the full methodology, the full technique and strategy they're using, so everybody understands it and everybody can provide feedback. So those are the 4 rules of lean. So I've done my 8, I've done my 5, I've done my 4, and now let's get to the 1. One technique, it's not the only one, but I'm going to give you one technique on how you can identify and eliminate waste in your process. And that's something called Kaizen. Kaizen is the Japanese word. A Kaizen, it's a business philosophy about this concept of continuous improvement, right? It's about it comes from Shewhart. It's about this concept of ongoing on a continuous basis, trying to achieve perfection in everything, your work practices, your efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. Kaizen is this philosophy of constantly trying to perfect what you do. There's a culture that evolves from this. If everybody is so focused on perfection, how does that affect the organization? Well, everything in the organization can and should be approved. There are no sacred components that can't be touched. Everything, the management structure, the org structure, the policies and processes, everything is fair game for suggestions for improvement. It permeates all levels of the organization. People should be trying to improve every single day. Don't just wait for a yearly event or a quarterly event. This is a daily effort for people to perfect what they do. Everybody's trying to make clients have the ideal experience, which is good too. It's not just perfection in our production processes, but dealing with stakeholders, making sure stakeholders, external stakeholders, are happy with the organization. These companies with a Kaizen culture not only produce great products, but their clients are thrilled to be working with them. And something else is, don't just come with criticisms. It's not a culture of complaining about things that aren't perfect. You're expected to make suggestions or recommendations. Nobody comes forward with just a complaint. They have to come forward with the suggestion or the possible improvement as well. So here's something that's not working, and here's how I think we could make it better. Those two have to go together in a Kaizen culture. So it's about problem solving, not problem identification. Kaizen has 5 main elements. One is teamwork. Everybody's got to work together. We've got to work in cross-functional teams because there are multiple roles that might be involved in identifying a problem or fixing a problem, or my problem might be caused by a different role in the process. So we all got to get together to discuss. So it's all about teamwork, forming Kaizen teams. It's about discipline. Everybody needs to follow the process. Everybody needs to try and perfect themselves, work hard on a daily basis to achieve that optimization. It actually improves morale significantly because people feel now they can make a difference. They understand how their role impacts the organization, and they feel personally empowered to make changes to improve the organization, making them feel like they are contributing. It's good for morale overall. We have something called quality circles, which is these cross-functional team groups that help discuss problems and see if they can find sources and ways of improving. That's another foundational element of Kaizen. And lastly, as I said, don't just complain about a problem. You have to make suggestions to improve them. So the steps for doing Kaizen are, first of all, find a problem. And when you find a problem, we need to do a bit of analysis, right? So look at the as is, document the current situation, come up with a vision for how it could be better, define how we're going to measure and document that to be state as well. So the as is and the to be, then define how we're going to measure if it actually worked. So what metrics can we gather on the as is that we can remeasure once we've made the change and we're in the to be state? How can we measure it again just to prove if it made a difference or not? Brainstorm with a bunch of people to see if those are right and if there's other more creative ways of solving this. Build a plan on how we're going to make the change, implement the change, then measure and record those metrics to see if the change actually made a difference. Prepare a summary on what happened, the lessons learned, document what we know about it, and did it make a difference or not? And then create a short-term action plan on how we're going to now roll this out and make it permanent, right? Making any changes to our ongoing standards. How are we going to sustain this movement? We just made a change. How are we going to make sure this change sticks? What do we need to reinforce it or support it down the road? Is there training? Are there reminders that need to be sent out? Or do we have to change people's performance metrics or criteria to make sure that they're personally now measured against, expected to do this new behavior? So those are the Kaizen steps as well, largely tied to how we do organizational change management. If you're involved in those kinds of activities, you'll recognize these steps. And the results Does this stuff work? Does lean project management, and this is part one, focusing on eliminating waste, does it work? Well, here's an example. The Toyota Prius is a fascinating case study. The Prius, from the time it was decided that Toyota was going to build a Prius, the executives called in some key people and said, I want you to build an electric car. Here's some money. I don't want you to follow our processes at all. Do whatever you need to do, but I want a Prius in 18 months. And the scientist said it's impossible. He says, it's not, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a factory on the other side of town. I don't want to see you guys for a year and a half. You don't have to come to our meetings. You don't have to give me an update once in a while, but I'm not expecting you to follow our normal corporate bureaucracy. I'm not going to expect you to follow our normal corporate processes. Follow any process you want, but darn well get this thing done in 18 months. And they did it. They did it because they chose processes that would be optimized for speed and innovation. They didn't follow the normal corporate bureaucracy. And they produced the first 100 Priuses in 18 months. Now, competitors, other car companies, Ford, et cetera, took over 4 years to produce their first commercial electric vehicle. But the Prius came out in 4 years. The competitors took over 600 engineers to produce their first electric car, to design it and build it. The Prius could do it with 150 because they removed all those process steps and the handoffs and the sign-offs and all the other people involved. They looked at efficiency. They used this Kaizen culture, this eliminating waste process, and was able to do it with a quarter of the engineers in significantly less time, in about a third the time. This they not only produced 100 Priuses, this included designing the car and designing and building the production facility to build those first 100 Priuses. Even just designing and building a plant normally takes 18 months, but they were able to design and build the plant and build the cars within that 18-month timeline. So this eliminating waste process really works. It's why the Japanese rose up economically in the mid-80s. It's why they've been so influential on our modern business practices. Okay, do we have any questions about what I've covered? If you do, you can just type them in the chat window and I will address them as necessary. So just feel free to type your questions in the chat window or the questions window if you have that, depending on whether you're using the browser version or the cell phone version of our interface. Feel free to type in your questions. In the meantime, if you have any further questions about this topic, if you'd like to hear more about lean, or if you're interested in lean or agile training or project management training, feel free to reach out to me. I can be available at Aguanno, A-G-U-A-N-N-O, at procept.com. That's P-R-O-C-E-P-T, Aguanno@procept.com. Feel free to Google me, look me up. I've written over 30 books on agile, audiobooks, DVDs on agile-related topics and project management-related topics. Feel free to reach out to me as a resource. Okay, and I remind you, part 2 of this webinar series is parts on eliminating waste. The next one is on now optimization and efficiencies. That's coming a little bit later. It's around some of the deployment issues around lean and lean thinking. That's coming up in a couple weeks, so stay tuned for that one as well. That webinar is, let me just double check here. That's actually going to be on October 6th if you're listening to the live webinar. October 6th, 2022. If you're listening to the recording, I apologize. You'll probably find it also recorded where you found this recording. Okay, are there any questions yet? Any questions yet? Okay, okay, Camille. Camille? Yeah, Camille, it looks like. Okay, I'm gonna reword your question. I think I'm having a little hard time understanding your question, but I think what you meant to ask is, how does lean relate to agile? I talked about that a little bit earlier. Lean is a philosophical precursor to agile. Agile practices came from lean. Lean existed first. So lean thinking was out there, and the early agile practitioners that were creating the agile movement actually looked at lean practices as one of the inputs into creating the agile management movement. Now, there are some key differences. Lean is largely focused on production, so repeatable operations, so like manufacturing. That's where lean came from, is operations rather than projects. Agile is more focused on projects. So you might want to think that lean is an operations method and agile is a project method for project-based businesses rather than operations-based businesses. That might be one way of looking at it, but that's a very simplistic view because there's elements of lean we can use on projects and there's elements of agile we can use in operations. So the actual answer is a little bit more sophisticated, but they are close cousins. Let's call it that. Lean is a close cousin, maybe even an ancestor of agile, I guess you could say. Okay, next question from Farheen. Can we get the video recorded? Missed a few points. Yes, absolutely. This video is being recorded and will be posted to the procept.com website. That's Procept, procept.com. It will be posted there within usually 24 hours. It'll be posted on the procept.com site, and it will also be posted to Procept's YouTube channel. So Procept, Procept. You can look it up on our website or our YouTube channel, and you can watch this again. Everybody who attends this webinar can get professional development units or PDUs. If you're PMI certified, you can get PDUs for watching this webinar, and others will be able to count them as well, depending on what other certifications you might have. So Scrum Master certified through the Scrum Alliance, for example, can claim PDUs. There's other organizations, IIBA and others that you can claim credits for this webinar as well. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. We're out of time. Remember, our next session will be held in 2-3 weeks on October 6th. I look forward to completing this discussion when I deal with that second component on agile project, or lean project management, part 2. So thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.